Ngā mana e ngā reo, e ngā matawaka o te motu nei, tēnā koutou katoa. Um, Ngā mihi manahau ki a koutou katoa, kua hui hui mai nei I tēnei rā. Uh, uh, Tēnā koe Natalie mō tō whakauru. Uh, Ko waio, ko Paul Brown tōku ingoa. Ko he uri ahau no tainui waka, ko karioi tōku maunga, ko whaingaroa, ko kawhia oku moana, ko tainui, ko Ngāti e kairo oku, hi kairo oku iwi. Um, Ko Paul Brown tōku ingoa, he mahia, kei te mahia hau ki kai Pangaro, kai tātauranga, kai rangahau ki te wharewananga o Waikato. So kia ora everyone, and thank you for all coming. My name's Paul Brown. I'm a lecturer here at the University of Waikato in the Department of Mathematics. And today's talk, I'll just bring it up, making sure my share screen works properly. Hopefully you can all see this. Natalie, can you give me a thumbs up that that's all working? Can you see my, okay, great. Okay. So the talk today is police delivery and Māori data. Now, I don't know if you've seen in the media recently, there's been a couple of, or a few different reports come out under the banner of understanding policing delivery. So this was a kaupapa that was led by Tarkin Workman to look at how police deliver their services to a wide range of different communities. And there were several research teams involved, which I'll get into in a sec. And I was also involved in a lot of the quantitative analysis that we did in the first phase of this project. And then there was another small part of the research that looked a little bit more into the data and the data systems that police have, and what are some of the challenges of using that data in a research context to understand how police deliver their services. So the title of the talk is Police Delivery and Māori Data. So I'll just quickly go over the UPD kaupapa itself and how we actually did the research, who was involved, and some of the findings from the data Stocktake and gaps analysis report, affectionately known as the data saga. We'll look at some of the findings and the recommendations that were made from the data saga report to New Zealand Police. So just to go a bit more in depth about the Understanding Policing Delivery project, it was investigating whether, where, and to what extent bias may exist in New Zealand policing services. That's a pretty big word, bias. What we're really looking at here is systemic bias or institutional bias, biases that cause inequitable outcomes for different services or different communities based on the institution's policies, based on the institution's procedures, and their training as well. Now, we looked across all sorts of different communities, rainbow communities, Pacifica, disability, but police Māori relations were a large focus of this project. So a lot of the recommendations that you might see in the media revolve around inequities relating to Māori, and the phase 2 reports that have just come out go more in depth into some of the case studies where bias was found, and things that they can do or actions that they could do to try and resolve some of those issues. Now, police deliver a wide range of services. So we looked at 3 key research areas that made up a few different types of services. The first was who police stop and talk to and how they engage with that member of the public. The second key research area was decision-making around the use of force. So what were the actions surrounding primarily tasers, which one of the research teams looked heavily into, and what was the kind of context of that situation, and how were those decisions made? And then decision making around prosecutions. What were the factors that influence prosecution decision making? And that's a kaupapa that I took, that I was a part of and wrote the report for. I should note that you can Google up UPD Police, or New Zealand Police, and you'll find all of these reports. They've all been released as of last Thursday, I believe. Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about that particular report today because there's another, like I said, the Data Saga report that also came out, which is primarily to do with data. But those were the three key research areas of the UPD kaupapa. Now, how we actually went about and did it was quite interesting for me as a statistician. So I'm used to being in the back room, on the computer with the data, getting my hands dirty, and not really interacting much with others. You know, people come to me and they say, Paul, I've got this data. Can you please work your magic? And I say, okay. And then I go about trying to extract information from that data. That's what a statistician primarily does. Here, it was a process or a research kaupapa that there was a lot more involvement for me, to be a part of the data collection, and actually going in and speaking with those that work on the ground. And that was the same for all of the research teams. So I'll get into that. So we had a community research approach, a real whanaungatanga approach to this research. There were 3 research teams involved: Ihi Research out of Christchurch, Mana Pounamu Consulting, which I believe Pounamu is in Timaru, and the Donald Beasley Institute, which do a lot of work around the disabled community and advocating for disability issues. So we were the ones that did the research. There was me included. I'll get to my role in a second, but all of the research was done by these teams, supervised by a couple of different groups. The first was the independent panel that was led by Kim Workman, who, if you don't know, is a big advocate in the justice reform space, especially for Māori and Pacifica. And also Professor Kylie Quince. Kim is great. He's got a lot of energy, but he is in his 80s now. So he actually stepped down as the chair of the independent panel partway through the process, and Professor Kylie Quince took over. Professor Kylie Quince is a lawyer out of AUT. Now, one of the great things about this kaupapa was that we were also led by a police OAG, an operational advisory group led by Superintendent Scott Gemmell. Scott is a superintendent in Auckland. And the OAG were made up of 30 or so, actually it became a little bit larger, frontline staff members from police. So we really got to, I mean, it's quite easy for us to go through data and come up with these conclusions without really understanding the context or the day-to-day operations that frontline officers and frontline staff have to deal with. So it was really interesting with the process. What we would do is I'd get some data, I would come up with some conclusions from the data, I would take it back to the OAG, and they would give me a lot of context about perhaps why that statistic came about, what's wrong with the data that we have, what's wrong with the analysis that we've done. It gave us a whole lot more context. So it was a really, for me, who, like I said, is usually in the back room, just getting my hands dirty with the data, it was a really interesting process. And I think it gave the research a lot more breadth, a lot more It was a lot more robust with their involvement. We had our own bespoke ethics process led by Professor Linda Smith, and that was quite thorough, which was good, especially with the data stuff. And it was supported by police executive leadership, including Andrew Costa. Andrew Costa was the commissioner of the police up until last month, I believe, and has stepped down. And they are looking for his replacement at the moment. But he was actually, this whole project came about as a discussion from Tarkin Workman and Andrew Costa around current policing methods around the world. I think they were quite influenced by was it the George Floyd murders and the Black Lives Matter movement. And also Tarkin was quite concerned around the use of facial recognition technologies around the world and in New Zealand, especially on rangatahi. So they came together, and from their conversations, this kaupapa arose. I should say that the independent panel was made up of both community advocates and a couple of police retired former superintendent police officers as well. So it had quite a range of people feeding back into the research itself. There was a two-stage process. The first phase that I was heavily involved with was using police data to kind of quantify the evidence of bias in those three key research areas, if we could. I'll get to some of the challenges of that in a second. And then phase two, which I wasn't so much a part of, with the case study investigations, and that report came out last week. So my role in this whole process was to provide quantitative support to the research teams. So the three research teams came to me over the course of the kaupapa and asked if I could analyze some of their data, which I happily accepted most of the time. But also I took the main role in the third research stream, the decision-making around prosecutions. And like I said, you can find that report online. Now, another role that I had that came about as a consequence of issues with the police data itself was this data stocktake and gaps analysis to really kind of understand the data infrastructure that police have and some of the challenges regarding research using that data. So when it came to the data itself, and like I said, phase one is using police data to investigate services. So before I even came on board with this project, some of the research teams went out and spoke to the data experts within New Zealand Police and to see what kind of data was available for the three research streams. So the first, who police stop and talk to and how they interact. For the most part, data is not collected, and probably for good reason. I mean, if you have a police stop on, say, a police road stop, you don't want a road stop to be so long because they're collecting your data while they're stopping you, or a police breath check or whatever, collecting your number plate, collecting your name, collecting your passengers, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that is not done by the police for the most part. So data is not collected for most police interaction with the public, which makes it extremely hard to do any quantitative analysis. We did find some ways around it, which I'll just briefly mention shortly, but that was an extremely hard research stream to really ground in data and evidence. Decision-making around the use of force, there is quite a bit of data, especially when it comes to tasers. Police have body cams. A lot of these interactions are recorded on video. And after any kind of use of force, there is a report that has to be written. And so there's valuable information in those. The only issue really is that they're all from the officer's perspective. So any kind of a lot of the analysis that you can do with it, like I said, is from the officer's point of view, not so much the person that use of force was applied upon. Nothing comes from their point of view, or very little. However, decision making around prosecutions, there is good, robust data collected for analysis and modeling. And we actually did that analysis and modeling and were able to perform good, robust statistical analysis and inference in that report. But however, there are still issues regarding the data, especially from a research perspective, if you're trying to understand different communities and how they are affected by the service, or if bias exists in that service for those different communities. So the data saga, it really came about through these conversations with the research teams and New Zealand police, and understanding that there are really large gaps in police data. Police actually collect a ton of data, and we'll get to that shortly. But for a lot of the things that we try to, the research questions that we wanted to probe into, it was really hard to find good quality data that New Zealand police held. So the data saga purpose was to gain insights into the data issues that undermine the ability for police and researchers in general to understand service delivery. So understanding the processes of data collection from the frontline point of view and investing parts of the data infrastructure that are that make it such that research is challenging. Also, what are some of the data gaps that currently exist for understanding police service delivery? So this was kind of an offset of the main research focus, and it became so big that it actually became its own part of the Understanding Policing Delivery project. So the methodology. We interviewed a wide range of police employees, quite a wide range. So not just frontline officers in the OAG and outside, but also those that worked as data experts, statisticians, data practitioners within New Zealand Police, and other data collectors, such as those that work in communications, answering the 111 or 10-5 calls. So we're able to interview a fair few police employees, over 70 employees, and also consulting literature inside and outside of New Zealand Police. The one part of this, I mean, I had 4 to 5 months to complete this research, and that's not a lot of time when you consider that there's police stations all across the Motu. There's heaps. And really, the police employees that we interviewed were from New Zealand Police Headquarters. Those maybe in Auckland or Northland or down south may have different views, and we weren't able to collect those views in our interviews that we conducted. But the one thing that had happened a few years back was New Zealand Police put out a data strategy. They've actually been doing these data strategies for quite a few years now, since about 2008, I believe, data and ICT strategies, so that they can actually kind of unlock the potential of the data that they collect. And part of that process was we're interviewing data practitioners and officers across New Zealand. So we did consult the literature for that particular study and other internal initiatives that require the use of police data. There's some great projects going on, the Gender and Ethnicity Project, which actually had stopped, and they're trying to get it going back again, but also the Data Disability Roadmap for disabled communities. There's a lot that actually goes on inside New Zealand Police, and it was actually quite nice to see because, one thing I should have said before is that New Zealand police took a little bit of a risk here by allowing us lifting the hood of what they do. I don't know if everyone was within police was for it, but for those that participated, it was, it really, like I said before, gave us a lot more of a perspective on what goes on and how hard often the jobs are for New Zealand police. So yeah, internal initiatives, we also looked into some of those. Now, just a couple of things before we get into findings, just some perspective on data collection and the data infrastructure that they have to play with. Police collect a ton of data. They collect a lot. And their aim, according to their data strategy, is to deliver exceptional services through the use of insights from their data. At this point, it's good to note that there's a difference between operational data and data for research. I'll get into the age of the data infrastructure in a sec, in the next slide. But really, over time, the data system and infrastructure has been built to satisfy the needs of operations. What do they need to do in this moment in time to keep the peace in a certain situation? Much different, well, not much different, but it is different for that policy and long-term perspective, using historical data to create insights to change policy procedures or to at least investigate them and to see what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, how they deliver services to different communities. The data infrastructure is not set up for that particular purpose. The purpose is mainly for operations. Now, in terms of who collects the data, data is collected primarily through frontline staff. That's frontline officers and communications. They collect the bulk of the data. I don't have a statistic, but from the data experts that we consulted with, it's anywhere between 80 to 90% of all the data is collected through frontline officers and communications. There are many practical limitations to frontline staff collecting good quality data. So you can imagine an officer responding to a call. There's a family harm incident. Tensions are very high, and there's a need for the officer to keep, or the officers to keep the peace, to ensure that no one gets hurt. But you don't want them standing around collecting the data at that particular point in time. Even though data is very important, we don't want data collection to get in the way of the primary service that the officer has. So the nature of the job makes it extremely hard to collect good quality data. And that goes for communications as well. When they're responding to a call, and they need to deploy officers, time is of the essence. It could be seconds between life and death for some of these calls. So again, it's not a matter of, oh, okay, you have to collect the data, how many people involved, etc. It's just we need to get officers deployed from the station to point A in a certain amount of time, or in a very fast, as fast a time as possible. And don't ever discount errors like human error when it comes to data entry. I could imagine someone coming back from a shift on the beat, have all these police reports, getting a bit tired, and oops, made a mistake. When I talk to data experts that deal with the data and use it, they say it's so often that they'll find an address in a incorrect box, or the address of the place is actually the address of the station, because people make mistakes, so there's a whole lot of entry when frontline officers and communications are those collecting the data. There's bound to be errors in data entry. And that's just a quick snapshot of data collection processes. When it comes to the infrastructure itself, there are three main databases that New Zealand Police have. The National Intelligence Application, NIA, and that a lot of offender data goes in there. Communications and resource deployment, that's a database mainly for those in communications, answering the 111 and the 10-5 calls. That's the card system. And there's also the PIPs, police infringement processing systems, fines, etc. Many smaller databases exist, but for specific purposes and data storage. The data regarding use of force is primarily located in something called the Tactical Operations Reporting database, the TOR database. The praise and dissatisfaction data that was used to kind of understand the first research stream, who police stop and talk to and how they engage, has its own database, etc. Smaller databases for specific teams to do their things. Now, a big issue with these databases is that they're very old. And that doesn't mean to say that in a vacuum and individually that they're not good. A lot of them are very good. But they've been around for a long time and they've been built upon one another. So you've got NIA here, you've got PIPs here, you've got CARD here, and they've all been built in a silo. And so because they're built in a silo, it's very hard to link data sets from different databases. Not just those three, but including the smaller databases that exist. So everything exists, but all individually, all in a silo, that makes interoperability of these databases extremely hard to manage. So yeah, these old legacy systems, great individually, but very poor when it comes to connecting them up. So that's kind of an insight into a little bit of the data infrastructure that police have to work with. The other issue with them being old is that you have old definitions of data. You have old definitions of what ethnicity constitutes. One of the issues with ethnicity data is that you can only enter one ethnicity, which is pretty bad, especially given the kind of multicultural, multi-ethnic society that we have. Although if you choose Māori, you are able to input 2 iwi and 2 hapu. So at least that's a nice feature. But for me, I'm Māori and my father's born in England. I couldn't say that I'm both Māori or New Zealand Pākehā. I have to choose one or the other. And in most cases, I don't even get to choose, and I'll get to that shortly. Also gender, male, female, the male-female binary. That's the only 2 informative categories you can choose in these old legacy systems. There is a third, which is called other, or it's either other or unknown. I actually can't remember which one it was. But very poor in terms of the gender diversity around it as well. So these old systems are not built for the current age, 2024. So these interviews actually reveal quite a bit, and also revealed that police have had the same kind of issues with their data systems for quite a while. Because a lot of the themes that we found in our interviews were the same as the themes that were found in the data strategy interviews done around 4 years ago. So 13 different themes overall in terms of data issues. I will go through them very briefly, and I'll only go through 5 or 6. I won't go through all 13. But there's issues regarding querying, searching, and reporting. And that's basically due to the old and siloed nature of the data infrastructure. Time consuming due to old systems. Standardized reporting often is not required. Data capture and quality. Sometimes it's not clear why police want to keep certain data and many times have no idea what to do with it. I should have actually included this in the data collection. Like I said, police collect a lot of data, a lot. Sometimes it's good and good quality and usable in a research context and operational context, but sometimes they collect other data that it just sits there. and really does nothing, and people aren't really sure why they collect it. Um, and so if it just sits there, it kind of convolutes the system even more. There's also technical and behavioral issues, and I suppose operational issues why data quality here can be very poor. Now, because you've got these old siloed systems, information and data security or data sharing and security is a big worry with the New Zealand police. Sharing data is challenging, many times done through email. Also, your old USB sticks, plug it in, download the data, and you take it around with you. Hope you don't lose it. Um, these kinds of practices, especially with sensitive data, is really bad. Um, Now they, of course, are trying to improve their standards all the time, but at a practical level, on the ground, um, sometimes it's just too tempting to just flick an email with that data set and say, "Yep, here it is." And then, of course, security is always a challenge. Um, Information provenance, information of a person, of an offender, of a victim, can come from multiple sources. If the source is unknown, it can lead to errors in reporting and interpretation. There's quite a few that suggested that information provenance has been a problem in the past. Uh, Now, there's always solutions that are coming up to issues that these organizations that have large or big data have. The want for new tools often results in new data sources, but really it just convolutes the system more. There's a lot of new data sources that come about, but they often replicate what's already been done somewhere else. And of course, that leads to bad information provenance or issues regarding information provenance as well. But really, it's that convolution of building on top of the siloed data infrastructure that convolutes things. Unreportable data, like I said, some of these data systems are old. Some applications for capturing data predate modern reporting requirements. And it's quite labor intensive to extract and gain insights from some applications. I want to get this date right, I think 2018 or 2017, police brought out their national reporting standards um, to kind of update how data is collected and how to report on some of that data. According to those that we interviewed, it's still quite loose and needs tightening up in certain areas. And part of that is actually the issues with the old legacy systems. So there were other issues that came about, descriptions of metadata, like I was talking about what constitutes ethnicity, gender, disabilities, etc. in this modern world. Old software versions, again, a kind of a function of the old legacy systems. Not a lot of training when it comes to actually using these systems and applications. A lot of staff reported that it actually took quite a bit of time from the beginning of their employment to a certain period of time. It took a few months to actually just understand how a lot of these databases work. The need for subject matter experts. Like I said, I'm a statistician. I'm used to sitting in the back room, and some of the data experts and police are as well. Um, you know, I don't want to be too unfair to New Zealand police, but from my point of view, actually, having experience going into NZ PQ quite often, it's not just the data infrastructure that's really siloed, it's the organization in general that's really siloed. So you've got a prosecutions team here, another team here, road policing somewhere else, and they don't interact a whole lot. So when they've got data on each other or using data from um, different parts of the organization, um, there's a lack of context sometimes in the data that they're analyzing or using. Um, Integrity and professionalism as well came up as a particular issue. So our conclusions from our interviews from the police side of things is that data is not generally findable or accessible. A lot of the time, staff are unsure of what data actually exists, where it lies, or what it means. Data is generally not interoperable and thus not very usable. It's very difficult to match data from different databases, hence building the data sets that you need to understand the research questions that you want is very hard to do. These issues are quite well known within police, so the data for some actually lacks trust. So those that are actually doing a lot of the reporting, will express that there's a lot of caveats with the conclusions that they come to because often the poor quality of the data or the known quality issues. And unfortunately, that's very hard to quantify. But there you go. Police are data rich. They've got a lot of data, but they're insight poor. It's that process of taking the data that they have and generating insights. That process there is what's really lacking to kind of achieve their aspirations of their data strategy. To use data and insights for exceptional policing services. So because of all that, it's very hard for the police to actually move forward, unable to advance their data systems. Unable to advance their analyses and their policies and procedures with data systems and smart technology due to the poor infrastructure that they have. So that was from the police's point of view. We also interviewed those outside of police, mainly the research teams involved with UPD, those that were in New Zealand Police and were working on other projects, and also members of the independent panel. And really, it came down for the need for high quality demographic data to really understand who police interact with, how they interact with them, and and how they make decisions around use of force and prosecutions. Prosecutions, it was nice because you had the demographic data available. Might not have been the greatest demographic data, but it was there. For these other services, it's very hard to tell. And like I said, there were issues regarding the particular type of demographic data that police work with. Gender data, for instance, is binary, and that doesn't comply with Stats NZ or the Public Service Commission standards. Ethnicity, you're only allowed one particular entry for ethnicity. No standard set in the NRS, the National Recording Standards. I will note that some of the data experts within New Zealand Police mentioned that you can change things in the NIA, but there's no prompts to do so. And this is in particular it's an issue for ethnicity data, where you've input a particular ethnicity from 30 or 40 years ago, but it needs to be changed. And there's no prompts for actually changing it. So you can't actually go in and find, unless you do a very rigorous query, you can't actually change the entry for that particular person. The self-reporting of ethnicity is very low. I heard different statistics thrown at me for this, all under 10%. So on average, around about 3 to 5% of ethnicity is self-reported. That means that the ethnicity that was input from the officer is from their point of view, not from the person's point of view. So a lot of the time it was the officer that was defining the ethnicity of the person. So self-reporting, very low. Disability data, there is very little, if any, disability data. They do have mental health flags for certain people under, if they've gone out to a call and they find that a person has or has some kind of disability, it will be flagged, or mental health issue, it will be flagged, but that's quite a recent thing. It's not always been done. So very little disability data. Now, one issue that did not come up until I prompted was Māori data sovereignty. There were data experts that were Māori that brought it up. There were some non-Māori that also brought it up. But generally, the ideas of Māori data sovereignty is not that well known in New Zealand police. However, on their data strategy, on their aspirations, they acknowledge data sovereignty and Māori data sovereignty with this particular passage. The data we hold belongs to all people of New Zealand. We are authorised to use it to advance the well-being of all New Zealanders. We treat the data we hold about Māori and ethnic groups with special consideration and recognise its cultural importance. For Māori data, we work to adopt the principles of Te Manawa and support the goals of Inaia Tonu Nei. And that's basically it. When it comes to actual, so this was their aspirations for their data strategy, but when it came to actual processes, national recording standards, things like that, there was very little, if none, consideration for Māori data sovereignty. And, with the interactions over the history of Māori and New Zealand police, Māori make up a large chunk of the data that police hold. Many interviewees within police acknowledge that the ideas of Māori data sovereignty that should be Māori data and Māori data sovereignty are generally not well known, if at all. So they still have a lot of work to do in that Māori data sovereignty space. And it was really interesting speaking with not only data experts within New Zealand police and community advocates about the effects of creating a really efficient data system. So let's say that we could get everything we wanted for New Zealand police in their data systems. It's very efficient. You can databases are all interoperable and you can get the data systems you need without too much time, and everything's working well. Does that just really mean more efficient ways to arrest Māori, which came up quite often? So there were quite a few concerns around Māori data that were raised and the effects of a strong data infrastructure. Considerations for holding iwi hapu information from tāmoko or any other kind of tattoo. There were some officers that were annoyed a lot of the time about the overrepresentation of their hapu within the NEA database, the offenders database, because of an either incorrect assumption or an incorrect information about an offender. And some of that also came from tāmoko or tattoos. So currently there's very little to no considerations for iwi or hapu information that is embedded within the data infrastructure of New Zealand Police. Also, of course, the big issue, the large issue of deficit framing of Māori, using Māori data. If we are to build a robust data system that you can use for research, who's going to be involved in interpreting that Māori data? That was something that came up very often in those that were quite concerned about it. Like I said before, this was an actual quote, efficient data systems are great, but will that lead to more efficient arrests or surveillance of Māori? Also, the use of very sophisticated machine learning or statistical models for hotspot analysis leading to over surveillance also came about in these conversations. Who interprets or gets to tell the story of Māori data, of course, was something that came up. How will Māori be involved in that process? And many interviewees said that acknowledgements must be made of historical injustices police have imposed on Māori societies or Māori populations, and the role data plays in that injustice. So these were some of the concerns that Māori participants had regarding using Māori data for efficient policing. So just to wrap it up, the recommendations that we made in this particular report, I think me in general, I'm quite for New Zealand police improving their data systems, not just because I'm a researcher and it's make it easier for me to get the data, but I think that aspiration of actually unlocking insights and using data for for operations and research is important. It's just how you do it is the issue. Development of a data catalog we recommended to sit alongside the national recording standards. This will actually help researchers to understand what data police hold, and it will help New Zealand police themselves understand what data they hold, where it lies, how to access it. Nothing like that exists yet, as far as we know. A formal set of guidelines and strategy for governance and use of Māori data. I think this is a really important one to help New Zealand police understand, or data experts within New Zealand police understand what is appropriate use of Māori data. Something similar to the ngā tikanga paihere guidelines that Stats New Zealand use for the integrated data infrastructure, something like that. But at least a first step towards them understanding what appropriate use of Māori data looks like. A larger data workforce to tautoko and support frontline staff. Like I said before, a lot of human error occurs, and we want police to be keeping the peace. That's their primary objective, not necessarily to just collect data or make that a priority over actual policing. Of course, this is very aspirational. The new government, I don't think, would be in support of investing in the services at this point in time. In fact, I should add that the police minister, when these reports first came out in August, I think the first words he said were stop blaming or stop bashing police. Of course, this is not to bash police. We did this work with police to help them improve their service delivery for different communities. So I thought that was a little unfair, but yeah. The fourth recommendation, data systems that ensure data is fair and balanced with care. When I say fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And yes, I did take that from the fair and care principles from the Indigenous data sovereignty experts. But the words findable and accessible were used a lot when it came to the interviews, because they can't find their data and they don't know how to access it, and they find it very hard to use when they actually do find it. But also balance that with those care principles. Researchers to fill data gaps as needed. Now, I didn't go into this for researchers as much, but again, we don't want police tripping up over themselves because they want to be data collectors. I mean, we want good quality data, we need it, but in some cases where researchers can fill data gaps like we did in UPD, that's what we should be doing until they can get a more robust data ecosystem or data infrastructure ecosystem. Outside of police should support other agencies to build data infrastructures that enable efficient data linking and interoperability. And in the report, we go into the IDI as a potential solution for this. And of course, that helps the researchers to fill those gaps, because perhaps the data does not exist within New Zealand Police, but it might exist in some other government agency. And if we can access it and interlink them, that helps create those better data sets for operations and research. So that is it. I hope I haven't gone over time. But ngā mihi manahu ki a koutou katoa, and happy to take any questions now, or if you have questions, I think Natalie will put out an email with my email address. So yeah.
Already done. There is one question in here from Winnie.
A specialist in records management. Are really interested in your suggestions and going forward and how we can kind of improve the infrastructure of this for research purposes. So I posted a question which I have subsequently deleted because I kind of feel like I hadn't really thought it through. They're just such giant databases that there is no way to make it available for researchers to go forward. And I think it's really great. From this type of work, how do you think that you could can you share the sort of the raw data with people for other researchers I mean, how can you make the work that you've done and the problems that you found more available for other people, so they don't have such a, constantly building upon the great research that you've done there?
You mean how can I?
Yeah, how is this project going to enable future research, do you think?
I think in the context of the other reports, and specifically the prosecution's report I done, we did recommend that this particular exercise be done over yearly to kind of track the progress that New Zealand Police makes. So that should create new insights into especially over time, on how police conduct prosecutions and how they deliver for different communities. I'm not really sure for this particular piece of work. It's really to make recommendations about how they can progress forward with their data aspirations, with trying to actually use their data to deliver exceptional policing services. One part of that is the operational side, where they're actually not too bad. But for the research side of things and to inform good, robust policy and long-term decision making, it's not so good. So I think it's really up to New Zealand Police, because the UPD is now, I think, finished now, understanding policing delivery, and we've made these recommendations. It's really up to them to take it on and to use it how they will. I mean, to be fair, I don't think I've said anything very new in this report. A lot of the issues are quite well known within New Zealand Police. It's just a matter of kind of trying to convince decision makers to invest in their data infrastructures, so that us as researchers can help them with their policy and long-term decision-making processes. So I don't know if that's quite answered your question. I apologize if it's not, Winnie, but thank you for your question.
There's a couple more in the chat here. There's a comment from Sarah.
I honestly can't contribute much more than what's in the news. I'm not hugely familiar myself with the data set that sits from the RDI. My wider team works with that, but that was obviously released a week or so ago. I want to say on 19th of October, shows how quick time's moving. That just kind of indicated that there was a subset of data from the NIA that was put into the Stats RDI back in 2018, I think it was,
Yes.
and they've now decided to provide a more regular input of that data set. So just to Winnie's question with regards to access to some proportion of the NIA data set, you may be able to gain access to that through the Stats NZ RDI from a ongoing basis. I just put the link there as well to the RNZ article, so you can see the information that I'm privy to.
Kia ora, Sarah. Yes, and thank you for mentioning that, because I did that was something that New Zealand Police have started to do. when we started this kaupapa, we did look at IDI data, but yes, the IDI data that New Zealand Police had put in hadn't been updated since 2018 or 2019. I can't remember. So it was old and not usable if we wanted to understand what's going on in 2022, which is when the kaupapa started. Yes, they have started to update more regularly the NEA database or the NEA information that is within the IDI. But just the NEA as far as I know, not any other databases.
I'm not sure if you can see the chat there, Paul, but Saburo has asked about he says, I'm interested to hear your whakaaro on the maturity of Māori Crown relations impacting on the data collections. In government administration, data collections are almost secondary part of service delivery. Like our ministry, we have a long way to serve Māori with equitable outcomes. Did you want to add to that, Saburo?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I just couldn't unmute myself. I do have fond memory with Waikato, by the way. I did my PhD at Te Po Wānanga ki te ao 10 years ago. So,
fabulous. Come back and visit.
Yeah.
Soon. So yeah, I really felt like looking ourselves in the mirror. Pretty much everything you raised was happening in our space as well. In admin data space, but we do have quite an interesting situation about reuse of administrative data in statistical production and research. But one thing is, a lot of Crown agencies, including us and police, of course, don't have a proud record of serving Māori with dignity and equity. And it's like, so yeah, we have quite a long way to go, I suppose. I think, to be honest, it's poor data collection is a reflection of lack of maturity, lack of respect from our end to iwi Māori. But I'm actually quite keen to hear your whakaaro.
Yeah, I mean, my assessment, in particular for New Zealand Police, because I don't have much experience with other government agencies, that the data maturity for Māori data is quite low. I mean, definitely those challenges exist and there is a lack of respect. I just wonder though, I think that data that is collected is really a reflection of the values of the kaimahi, those on the ground that are collecting it. And I think there is a little bit of a turning of the tide in regards to how police on the ground treat Māori. From what I've seen just on those 3 research streams, especially in the prosecutions, it's getting a little better. It's still not there, but it's still a little bit better. So if you take that conclusion that data collected reflects the values on the ground, then I think there is hope there and that things might start to turn. But like you said, there's a long way to go.
Kia ora, ngamihi what?
Yeah, it's ngamihi. Kia ora.
One more question, and then we might have to wrap things up. But any further questions, you can get hold of Paul on his email, paul.brown@waikato.ac.nz, which is in the chat. But
hi, Paul.
Kia ora.
Hi, Nelly. Thank you. Thank you for today. So I was following up on something you said earlier about what you were seeking to understand from the data. And despite all of the problems and challenges you've mentioned, did you get what you wanted from the data?
From the data for those 3 key research areas, kind of. Well, regarding prosecutions, for the most part, yes, we were able to get. I'm a statistician, so I like I like good, robust data for statistical methods. If you're going to do modeling and statistical inference, you need to make sure that the data that you have is appropriate for it. So in that case, yeah, it wasn't too bad. There's still issues, like I said, with ethnicity having only one category, gender only the gender binary, etc. So there's still issues there. With the other two, we got for the who police stop and talk to. I mentioned that is extremely hard to get good data for that, or if any data. The research team that was involved in analyzing that particular question looked at praise and dissatisfaction data. Now, praise and dissatisfaction data is not data that you can use for statistical inference, meaning that you can't use it to say something about the broader population. It's data that's just come through from an individual's experience, but there's still information you can extract from that, and they did a good job in extracting that information. Similar with Taser, they got some good information from the reports, although the reports were all from the police's point of view. So I don't know if you can ever get perfect data, but there was enough there in the data that was analyzed to suggest what we were looking for. Is there evidence of any kind of bias regarding the services that police deliver? Can we ground that in evidence? And in the case of prosecutions, can we also quantify it? How much of a difference is there between Māori and New Zealand Pākehā for the likelihood of prosecution, etc.? And we could do that. So yeah, it's about as good as we could hope for, considering where they initially started. When I said those initial conversations, everyone took oh no, we're not going to be able to. It's going to be hard to perform that phase 1 of the research. So yeah, kia ora. Thank you for your question. I hope that answers it.
Thank you. Do you want to finish us off, Paul? And then I've just put in your email, so hopefully everyone can get hold of you if they've got further questions.
Ai, ka mutunga ahau ki te karakia, unuhia, ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātea, kia mama te ngākau te tinana, te wairua e te ara takatu. Ko ia rā e rongo whakairia ake ki runga, tūturu whakamaua kia tina. Haumi e hui e, taiki.
Taiki.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, everybody.